Did you know that so far WikiLeaks has published more than 10 million documents?
I did not, but I do know that a 60-page decision by 2 high court judges in London said that Julian Assange will not immediately be extradited to the United States.
So it's funny. This is one of the few things where we talk a lot about cyber criminals, and I don't know if you even want to call Julian Assange that an alleged cyber criminal, but certainly alleged and charged in the United States with crimes.
Yep.
But maybe not cyber crimes. But this is the one part where cooperation between the United States and sort of democracies in Europe breaks apart. It's like the one area where they needle us really, really, really hard.
Yeah.
And it's about our prisons and our punishments and how off they are from how the rest of, I guess, Europe or how Europe does things.
Right. That was also very interesting to me that's kind of what this is hinging on. Although I've loosely followed the case for years now, that's really the thing that caught my attention this time around, that it's the nature of our prison systems that's kind of hinging on whether he's extradited or not. I don't know if that's something that a lot of Americans even realize, maybe.
Yeah. So I think most people think that if the United States charges someone who's living in England or someone who's living in France with a crime, they just ask the governments of those countries to turn them over, and they get on a plane and they fly to the U.S. and they get to appear and have their proceeding here. But that's not really how it works. I mean, I think Julian Assange was originally charged, my goodness, maybe 5 years ago, and by indictment in the U.S. for conspiracy to commit computer crimes, but also for a violation of something called the Espionage Act. And that's pretty serious because the Espionage Act in the U.S. has as its maximum penalty the death penalty.
Right.
And the way that these extraditions work is the person who's subject to extradition from that country can challenge it by saying, among other things, the values and the due process and the other features of the judicial system in the country they'd be sent to, here the U.S., constitutes, cruel and inhumane treatment under general human rights principles or that country's own human rights principles. And so that's what's happening here. I saw a documentary, and this was kind of a silly thing. I saw a documentary a couple of years ago on Swedish death metal, and it was about a specific place in time where a couple of black metal bands in Sweden had committed some serious crimes.
Yeah.
And they were interviewing one of the folks who had been convicted of, I think, burning down a church. Right.
Yep,
and
you're right.
You're looking at the interview, and the guy is in what looks to be a dorm room. There's an old inkjet printer, and it finally, where is this guy? Like, did he go back to college?
Right.
And it turns out he's in prison,
right,
in this country, and it looks like a dorm room, and he's got a printer, he's got access to a computer,
Yeah.
And I think being in the United States, I mean, our prison system is rough, and that's essentially what's on trial in this extradition proceeding over in the UK is what are the conditions under which Mr. Assange could be held, and is he subject to the death penalty? Because a lot of Western democracies, other than the U.S., have essentially stopped that, particularly for non-murder crimes.
Right. There's a lot of interesting little controversial tidbits to this case. I mean, not only is the Espionage Act itself controversial, there are all of these notes about our own prison system. So far, the only assurances that some of the key assurances that the U.S. has given are that Assange will never be confined at another supermax prison like Colorado's ADX Florence that currently houses 300 people, but also that Assange won't be subjected to special administrative measures.
I think they were described, I think, in relatively loose terms in the Wired article that we were talking about. But I think it's essentially the idea of super surveillance or constant surveillance during the period of time that they're in the prison, including listening in on phone calls that he might have with his attorneys.
Yeah.
Is sort of the key one. And it's this idea that the United States just has this, our concept of prison is quite different from what goes on, particularly being held in a prison environment before your trial. Mm-hmm. It's very different in the U.S. Than it is in other countries. And so, putting aside all the, First Amendment arguments that have been made as to whether what Mr. Assange was doing in terms of publishing things that he had acquired allegedly without allegedly with the understanding that maybe they didn't come from a legal place when he got them, but really the crime he's charged with is the knowing publication of these materials. And so there's a lot that's at play here. But when we think about what can be done to successfully prosecute overseas alleged criminals for cyber crimes, maybe this isn't the best case to be making the law in the United Kingdom, right? The Julian Assange case isn't great. So I hope as a lawyer that it's not necessarily one for one with what will happen if we end up getting, the folks who are behind the Nigerian print scams, if they happen to pass through London and get arrested. It's unfortunate that the Julian Assange cases might be making the law there about extradition. Right.
Yeah,
for that stuff.
I heard several journalists talk about this and use the word unprecedented. And it seems completely backwards to make such a far-reaching law based on an unprecedented case.
Well, folks, welcome. I'm your host, Jack Clabby. I'm a cybersecurity attorney at Carlton Fields, PA in Tampa, Florida. With me is Kaylee Melton. Kaylee is the Vice President of U.S. Remote Publishing Teams at KnowBe4. We're going to take a short break, and after that, we're going to chat with Tanya Janca. Tanya is also known as SheHacksPurple. She's the head of education and community at Semgrep. Her InfoSec experience spans 2 decades. She's worked as a pen tester, a CISO, an AppSec engineer, and a software developer. So she's packed a lot of careers into a lifetime. In her free time, she writes best-selling books like Alice and Bob Learn Application Security. We look forward to talking with Tanya when we return.
Welcome to No Password Required, a monthly conversation that introduces you to some of the top talent in the world of cybersecurity.
So welcome back. Our guest today is Tanya Janca. Tanya, welcome to the No Password Required podcast.
Thank you so much for having me on.
So Tanya, I want to start by asking you about your current role, and then we'll back up and learn a little bit more about your career path. But can you share with us, what do you do now for Semgrep? What's your role?
So I am head of community and education, which is a role they made up just for me. Basically, Semgrep had a community already, but they didn't have a community manager, and they didn't really have an organized way to interact with them. They're just like, we really like these people a lot, and we want to figure out a way to serve them well. You have your giant SheHacksPurple community. What if you join us and we gently try to convince them to join each other, and you run events, and we could create an academy for them. I basically run events and speak at other events to try to contribute back to the bigger community at large, and then also attract people to our community. And then I'm creating a lot of content for our new academy, which is the education portion of my job. So a long time ago, I decided education was pretty important, and probably most of you agree. And I think the organizations have realized, if you make a really complicated product, which if you work in application security, you do, right? If you work in software development, you do. And so if we don't provide any education on how to use it, but also how does it fit into your security program as a whole? Why would you even want to use a tool like this? How to better basically your entire security department. If we don't handle any of those topics, our clients don't do as well. And so they're like, you seem to really like teaching. I'm like, I do. And so we decided it was a good match. And last year I came on board.
Tanya, what kind of what's the profile of someone who would get really good use out of this? And then when they go into the academy, what would they find?
Okay, this is great. A great question. So anyone that works in software development or in IT security would be a great person. But we also have some people who work in QA or project management who take some of the courses as well. So they sort of understand what everyone else is doing, or so they're better at managing AppSec projects, etc. At SheHacksPurple, my previous company that Semgrep bought, our idea was to create new AppSec engineers. And so we had people who were nurses, teachers, all sorts of different careers before they went and took our program, and then they graduated and started working full-time as security engineers.
That's really cool.
One of our famous students, he used to work in the middle of the ocean on an oil rig and only had high school, and he's a full-time AppSec engineer now. Yeah.
Nice. That's great.
Yeah, so anyone that's like a student, maybe studying computer science, or even, so technically minors aren't allowed, but we don't check your age. If you want to come learn for free, you can. But basically we have like all sorts of different types of people, whether they're at the beginning of their career or more advanced. So we're starting to create more advanced courses that we want to put in there. So what people will find, so we are launching May 1st, but spoiler alert, it's actually already open.
Oh, nice.
We opened it a few days early to like beta test. And so people already found their way in.
Nice.
I didn't really tell anyone. I'm like, how'd 200 people get in here over the weekend? Because my followers are smarter than me.
That's great.
But they'll find a full program for application security, so multiple levels where you learn right from the beginning how to build an AppSec program, what all the activities are, and then how to scale it, it really gets quite advanced by the end of the 3 courses. A secure coding course, so it's very basic and introductory. So anyone that writes any code would be able to take that course because it's language agnostic, which means it applies to every language. Yeah, and then we have a functional programming course. So if you wanted to learn about that, there's an API security course, and we are working on, so I want to re-record my course on incident response for software developers. So if there is a security incident, what should you, as someone who's not on the security team, do and not do? I've been teaching that for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And I recorded it, but the recording isn't great. So I'm like, let's just re-record it. It's only 10 videos. It's not that hard. So we're trying to upgrade a bunch of the content and refresh it. And then we're going to be releasing, there's also Semgrep 101 class. But we're going to release an advanced Semgrep class in the next coming weeks as well. And then I want to create something called a secure guardrails course.
Okay.
So
what would that be? Yeah.
How to make your application security program proactive instead of reactive. So how can we make like technical guardrails that kind of bump you back onto the paved road where you're supposed to be doing the secure default, right? And so how can we, first of all, identify our gaps and like what are the most important ones? And then, so how do we create a guardrail that doesn't tick everyone off, that isn't like high maintenance for the devs, but just like, hey, you're not doing what we all agreed we would do. Yeah. I'm notifying you. And if you've decided not to do that, you're well aware you're outside the bounds. And so sometimes there's a super legit business reason, but sometimes they're just like, oh, oops. And we, yeah. So kind of like, how can we get the message across as soon as possible and gently?
That's great. So you have a great passion for affordable cybersecurity education, and I know it developed in kind of a unique way. Can you tell us a little bit about it, where it came from?
Yeah, so I used to work for the Canadian government for a really long time, and I was a developer, and then I switched to security. And there was just not an AppSec class or an AppSec book that I could read or learn from. And I also, I don't know if you know, but the Canadian dollar is not as strong as the American dollar. And so I remember looking at SANS courses and being really interested.
Yeah.
And then calculating the exchange rate, and it would be 20% of my take home for the entire year for one class.
Okay.
Oh my goodness.
As a software developer, like a senior software developer.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, the cost of living in Canada is different than the United States. We get paid different amounts. It's a bit more, I don't want to say modest, but just like you get paid less. And so I was like, how can I learn for free? So I figured out that if you speak at conferences, they let you in free. And I found, So the Canadian government's like, we can't really afford to, send you to lots of conferences, but I submitted to a conference, I got in free. So I'm like, my ticket's free. And then I shared a room with a friend. And so then I discovered if you were an OWASP chapter leader, which I already was because I'm a community type of person. Okay. I didn't realize there were benefits. So back then there was free training if you were a chapter leader, and I was a project leader and a chapter leader. Okay. So I had twice the chances. And so every conference I would get in to speak, and then I would get one of those seats. And then basically I started speaking more and more. And I'm a bit of an odd duck where I was a software developer, but I was also a professional performing musician who also, so I used to do acting and comedy as well. So I played music for 17 years. I have a bunch of albums out. If you find that person named Tanya Janca on Spotify, all those albums are me. And so basically when I started doing public speaking, people were like, someone doesn't usually jump up and down literally when they talk about DevOps, but you do. I remember my Fitbit would tell me that I was doing aerobics because I'd be so excited talking about computers.
That's so awesome.
And so people just started sending me plane tickets to do all the things. Yeah. And it sounds weird, but I am dyslexic. So I'm not a person that says they are. I'm like literally actually dyslexic. Okay. And so the way that I learn to do a thing is, I read about it, I'll watch someone else do it, then I do it, then I show it to someone else. And then I've got it for life, right? And so I started this online streaming thing called OWASP DevSlop, where me and my friends would just hack DevOps systems because we wanted to learn how to pen test in a DevOps environment. And I'm like, I'll just update my framework today. I'll do this. And I would just live code and learn. And by showing everyone else, I really perfected and honed my skills. And they would help me. They'd be like, Tanya, semicolon, sentence over there. I'm like, thanks, guys. Right. And I have like this really weird career progression where helping other people helps me too. And so I developed quite the passion for learning and sharing.
Tanya, you mentioned OWASP a couple of times. That's not the Organization of American States. What is OWASP? Tell us what you mean by that.
Okay, so OWASP, OWASP, the worst branding of all time,
right?
Stands for Open Worldwide Application Security Project. And I'm a lifetime member. Basically, we are a group of nerds that are around the world. We have, I think, 370 something chapters around the planet, like all in many different countries. We have over 100 active open source projects. We have conferences multiple times per year that move around the planet, but more so we're this community of, I estimate at least half a million people. Okay. Where basically we're all very passionate about helping people make more secure software. And so we teach each other and share and learn. And so when I started learning application security, someone said, hey, you should come to this meetup. We're going to hack some stuff together. And we did some buffer overflows. And I was like, this brings me back to college. That was so fun. And then before I knew it, I was a chapter leader because I've always been a community leader, like helping to organize conferences and musical groups and all these things, right? So it was a really natural fit. I'm like, I want to organize a giant capture the flag contest. Of course I do. And so I got to basically book lots of amazing speakers so I could learn from them. And then after doing that for, I think, 3 or 4 years, my co-leader was like, listen, you need to speak. I'm like, no. And I'm like, I'm the background. That's the stage over there, far away. And he's like, no, you need to speak, because we never had a female speaker in the 10 years of our chapter. And I kept inviting women. Yeah. And they all said no. I invited like 20 women and all of them said, no, I don't know enough. And I remember one of them, she had 20 years cyber experience. And she said she didn't know enough. I'm like, are you kidding? I wish 10% of the stuff in your brain was in my brain.
Right.
Yeah. Wow.
And so he's like, you need to be that example so we can have other women speakers. So I spoke and I was certain I would die. I was like, I'm going to have a heart attack. I'm going to die. It's going to be terrible. And then one of our community members was like, why are you nervous? You're our leader. We love you. You're like our mascot. You could get up there and drool and we would tell you you did a good job.
But wait, Tanya, you had been performing as a musician in all manner of places. Did that not translate? What was it, did you just saw it as something very different, or did you find that over time your performance experience with music did translate once you made the connection? Like, how did that work?
Basically the first couple of times I spoke, I just felt I didn't know enough because I'm like, I'm a beginner. Who cares what I know? But it turns out lots of people are at the beginner level and really want to know those first foundational lessons. I was surprised, and finding it out from someone that's extremely enthusiastic and just like really excited about it. Turns out my fascination translates to other people becoming fascinated. But I guess like when you perform music in a bar, a lot of people are drunk. It's dark. You're far away on a stage. I don't necessarily have great respect for 100% of people in the audience. Like I'm like, oh, there's someone that looks like he's going to barf soon. He's doing his 12th shooter. I'm not worried about his opinion of me, but standing up and speaking in front of my community of people that I admire, I was just like, what if they think I'm stupid? Like, they're so smart. But they were really, really nice. And a bunch of the men in my community let me practice on them and helped update my slides with me and made sure I was correct. And then when question period came, and I didn't know the answer to one of the questions, one of my friends from the community said, hey, may I answer that for you? And then he gave a great answer. And then he like looked at me and gave me this big smile and like a wink. Yeah. And they're just so supportive.
Yeah.
And they're like, everyone wants the person on stage to succeed. And I've seen that over and over again. Like everyone wants you to do a good job. No one wants to be there and see you fail or be awkward. And so it was just a really good experience. And so then they're like, you should speak at the JavaScript meetup. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I just spoke at every meetup that would have me. And it became very similar to my music career where I was like, I'll speak anywhere.
You get to have a lot of adventures when you say yes to things like that too, I imagine.
Yes. And then I had an ulterior motive. I invited all of them to join OWASP. And we went from 100 members to 1,500 members in 3 years.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, wow.
That's amazing.
It was great.
So one thing, we're moving into election season in the U.S., and we know you have a background in that, one of the hottest issues around. Can you just share a little bit about your own experience in election security?
Yes, absolutely. So like I said, I worked in the Canadian government for a long time. And one of the places I worked was Elections Canada. And first I was the lead developer leading the team that wrote the software that essentially makes the election happen. Wow. And we finished slightly ahead of schedule, which was awesome. And they are very serious about security there. And so once I finished that project, I transferred to the security team, and then they promoted me. And then I ended up being the CISO that ran all the security across the entire country for our 52nd general election in 2015. Wow. And so Elections Canada, so they have one organization that runs the entire election across the whole country for federal elections. It's different than the United States, where I believe each state handles it separately. And that makes it hard for it to be uniform and standard, right? Because you have 52 different groups making decisions instead of one group. And so I think in some ways I had it easier. And we also have a smaller populace as well. Okay. There's, I believe, 11 or 12 Americans for every Canadian. So there's also that. But we have our own challenges. So our software had to run on a 32 kilobit modem in the Arctic.
Wow.
Yeah.
Whoa.
So it had to be real small and real fast. And we spent a lot of time on that. And the Canadian election group for many, many years, and by that I mean 100 or more, we have a practice election before the real election for every major election. So sometimes we have smaller elections where we have a minority government, but every time we have a majority government, 6 months or 8 months before, we have a pretend election, the full entire cycle. And we throw security incidents. We invited hackers to come. We had all sorts of, we just made it the worst possible. Everything that could go wrong goes wrong. And then we did postmortems. We fixed everything. And then I remember election day, I'm sitting there and it's maybe 11 a.m. and my boss puts his hand on my shoulder. He's like, you can calm down, Tanya. It's okay. Nothing's happening.
That is
It's
amazing.
Boring. And it's great because your team's been working for years on this.
Wow.
And my team was so incredible. And the way Canada works, you work with all these other departments that help you. And then you work with private industry as well.
Okay.
So private industry, all the infrastructure across Canada, they're we're not going to patch anything on this day. We're going to do brownouts and all these other things to support the election. And private industry was how can we help make sure the election's a success?
That's really amazing. It sounds, I don't know, being in America, that sounds very different than how I imagine that would be for us. Just want to be honest. What sort of advice would you give other people who are currently working on securing elections?
Okay, so I have many thoughts. One is centralization. That can help. Another thing, so many Canadian departments do this where we'll go and visit other countries that have great success and we'll share our technology with them or they'll share it with us. So elections shares, they'd be happy to just give you all the software and everything they use to run the election. They've shared it with, I think, at least one country in Africa, countries in Europe. They're very happy. So all the people that work at elections love elections. They'll come back every 4 years. We've had people work for us for over 20 years, come back every election. Yeah. And so they're very passionate about helping. And so lots of our departments will go visit Britain or wherever and share knowledge and software and whatever to try to make things better. So go visit other countries that are doing well and take lessons home. They'll sit there and walk you through everything because people that work on elections, it's not for the money. It's because they care.
I love that. It seems like the perfect little snapshot of how democracy happens.
Yeah, I got to go work with the Swiss government and talk with them about theirs. And I don't know if you know, but they've had very public, transparent processes where they've open sourced the software that helps them count their votes. Wow. They have big open public debates about it. They're very, very, they really want the public to trust the result, which is the most important thing for elections. In Canada, we still count the paper. And we do it with a member of every single party in the room and members of the media in the room. So when we report it, we're the last person. Everyone's already reported it. Everyone's texted it to whoever. It's already on the news. And we're here's the official result. And then everyone trusts it. Right? So we have an electronic copy and a paper copy. And then if anything's close, we can recount. And we keep those boxes for a really long time. And this is all shared on I believe it's shared on the website. If it's not on the website, then there's a white paper or something. But basically, they want to be transparent whenever possible with the Canadian public because them trusting in the result and the process is just the most important part. And if when I was there, someone broke a policy and I was all ticked off. I'm I'm the CISO. I'm angry you broke a security policy because we were supposed to return something by a certain time of day and they didn't return it until maybe 16 hours late. So we had this big bill and I was all upset because they didn't do the thing they're supposed to do. And the guy's well, Tanya, we were at a university registering people to vote and we were supposed to close and there were still hundreds of students. So I talked to my team and everyone agreed to work overnight outside for free so that every person who wanted to vote could. And he's like, I'm sorry. I'm like, never mind. I'm sorry. Forget I suck. You're awesome.
I should have assumed that's what you did. I should have assumed it was an all-nighter vote registration.
Right.
Yeah. And the whole staff just was like, we'll work for free. No problem. And I was just like, oh my gosh, you guys, hearts of gold. So yeah, it's really cool to work on something where everyone feels so passionate about your goal and everyone's so excited about it. And in the government, that's not always the case, right?
Yeah.
Like I remember working at Treasury Board, and their job is to approve different projects and funding and to write policies. And it's hard to get, for me, super fired up about policy.
Yeah.
Like I'm like, yes, a slightly different font.
Right. We changed a sentence.
Tanya, I think you're doing some volunteer work now with the Canadian government. Tell us a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. So I've been working with a group called the ICTC since 2018. And what they do, so basically Canada's government was like, we have to educate all of our kids about technology. So they've been working on that for a long time, but they decided, I think in 2017, we need to make a task force to make sure they know cyber. And it's funny because people that work in information security call it InfoSec, but everyone outside of InfoSec calls it cyber. And so they're like, who do we know that does cyber? And I was working at Microsoft at the time, and they're like, would you join our little committee and help us decide the types of things we're going to teach to our high school students and even younger. They have a couple things for younger kids, but they mostly focus on high school students, like privacy, protecting your digital devices, protecting your information, etc. And I was like, yeah, I'm on board. And so we meet every quarter, and so I'm the weird one on the committee, as you could imagine. So I do things like, one year we had for career day, I helped them find someone who was either a penetration tester or an AppSec person for like every single school across Canada that participates in their program. But I have all these amazing followers, and they volunteered. All of them are like, yeah, I want to go to my kid's school and tell them what I do. I want them all to become cyber defenders. They have this thing called Cyber Titan, where every year high schools make teams and they go and compete in a capture the flag kind of hacking learning contest. And so I help them promote that and get parents. So parents are often like, I don't want my kid to become a criminal. And they don't understand. No, defenders need to understand attacks, or they can't be good at defending, right? Like we're teaching them ethics as we teach them how to hack. This is the best way for them to learn this, right? And so helping to socialize that as well. I'm actually in a Canadian textbook now under ethical hacker because they're like, we need to have this as like a job so people understand that cybersecurity is a job. And so they're like, can we like put you in there? So I'm in a textbook now, which is like pretty fun.
Oh, that's like the joke. Like, you can look me up and I'm literally listed under the name ethical hacker. Oh, that's great, Tanya.
Amazing.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So it's been a really rewarding experience, but I'm always like, I haven't done enough. They need to know all the cybers. And they're like, we're getting there. But not every school subscribes to the ICTC content. They're allowed to not do it. So only maybe a quarter of schools are adopting this content. And we're trying to reach the teachers. And so part of, not to always like go on about Semgrep Academy, but when I ran SheHacksPurple, I had to make money, so I had to charge. But now Semgrep Academy is free. And so I'm hoping that a lot of teachers will access it and be able to learn for free so that they can speak confidently about these topics before they present the lessons, because that's most of the hesitancy is teachers, like every human ever, don't want to look dumb. That's normal, right? Yeah. I literally met with a colleague yesterday and was like, could we deep dive into this one technical aspect of guardrails? Because like, I need to be able to explain this example really well on a podcast later. Could we go over it? Because some parts are vague for me. And he's like, yeah, let's nerd out.
Oh, cool.
but not everyone can call Kurt like I can. So, so making resources available to everyone it's kind of my goal, if that makes sense.
So I know that you have a best-selling book as well. Can you tell us a little bit about Alice and Bob Learn Application Security?
Absolutely. So Alice and Bob are two characters that were invented in 1978 by cryptographers to explain to all us normal folks that aren't mathematicians what encryption was and how it worked and why it was important. And so when I started public speaking, I would say, it's not Alice's fault that this happened. Like, let's not point our fingers at Bob. And everyone in cyber always uses those as their examples. And so when I was writing my first book, I wanted to write kind of a handbook about AppSec, but I'm an unusual person, right? I'm dyslexic and I learn in different ways. And so I find when I went to school as an adult to learn French, so I learned French as a second language in my early 30s, which is really hard for dyslexic people. Okay. And so I went to a special school for dyslexic adults, and they taught me there's 21 learning styles. And so I tried to include as many as possible in Alice and Bob. So I'll explain, this is like the technical reason for this. This is the reason we do this. This is the syntax of this. And then I'm like, here's a diagram, or here's a story. And then here's how it would affect Alice or Bob. Like Alice in my upcoming book goes on a date with a penetration tester and he brags about XYZ, and Alice is not impressed. Alice breaks up with him.
I like that. Stop talking about yourself. Exactly.
Yeah, I like Alice.
Ask some questions of your own. Yeah.
Right.
Come on.
Well, he was bragging about doing something he should not have done on a pen test.
Oh, got it. Okay.
But Alice has very good ethics. But basically, people told me as I started doing public speaking, oh yeah, I remember how Alice is building her house and she has 7 kids and only 1 bathroom and everyone's going to kill each other. So you have to threat model. And it sounds weird, but like the story will help them remember the technical thing they need to do. And so when it came time to decide the book, I was like, it could be called the AppSec Handbook. And that would be like very respectable. And I'm like, but I want to have these stories and have like a fictional part of the book. And I want to have constant like tips and things. And I don't want it to just be this wall of text, because I find those really hard to read. I want to make the absolute most accessible textbook that I can. And so they're like, let's make the weirdest textbook ever together. And so I remember someone saying, I started reading your book Friday, and I was like, I'll read this over the next couple of months. And he's like, it's Sunday afternoon and I just finished it. Oh. And I laughed out loud reading a textbook. And that was not something I was expecting. And so awesome. I'm writing my second book and I'm 2/3 done. I have to have it all done by June. So I better move my bum.
That's not far.
I'm barely on track. And Alice and Bob are going to learn... They're going to learn secure coding this time. And so I'm covering the 10 most popular languages, the 10 most popular frameworks, and then generic advice that is for every web app or API. And then how software developers can participate in a secure system development lifecycle. So like, what the heck is a threat model? And like, what do you do if you go to one? Am I in trouble? And so kind of like the book that I wish that I had when I was a developer. I did every bad thing when I was a dev. I went to college in the 90s. Like, I'm old. I was like, yeah, I'm a good dev. I save all my passwords into my code.
Oh, man. Okay. Yeah, that's where I can easily get them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right?
That's where they are.
I'm helping the
That's
next
where I need
dev so they can find all the production passwords. And so now, because I did all those things, I feel like I can be a better teacher. I'm like, learn from my mistakes, folks.
So, Tanya, we know in addition to all the work that you do for the public and now for the schools, that you also do mentoring, and that's important to you. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do in terms of mentoring, and then maybe about if you've also yourself ever benefited from mentoring?
Absolutely. When I was a software developer, I had mentors, but I don't think I understood that that's what they were. I didn't understand, like I would know, oh, if I need help with this, I call this person and they always give me great advice. And I trusted them, but we didn't have a formal mentoring relationship. And then when near the end of my developer career, I made friends with a guy who was a pen tester, and he was in a band and I was in a band. So obviously our bands had to play together and we became friends. And he spent 1.5 years convincing me to become a pen tester. And he's like, I'll mentor you. You'll be my apprentice. I'll teach you everything I know. And I don't say his name because it did not work out well, because he offered me a job at the end and I'd said yes. And then I got a much, much, much better offer. And so then I declined. And then he called that employer and trash talked me till they rescinded that job. Yeah. And told a whole bunch of lies about me. And I learned wow. Yeah. And I'm like in my first infancy, like the first year of my new career. And I'm having like the most well-known person in my city saying that I make false reports and that I lie. And I was like, wow. So someone met with me and was like, I think you should find a different job before I started. And I was just like really heartbroken. And so I actually had multiple job offers. So I took the third job offer and that worked out great. And I found my next 2 professional mentors who were amazing. And they both knew the first one and were like, you're the first person to actually pass his apprenticeship. You might not be aware, but every other person's failed before the year is up. And he trash talks all of them, and he trash talks his clients, and he trash talks everyone.
Wow.
And so the fact that you actually made it through the year, you're the only one. So that's actually really quite impressive. And I was like, okay. And it turned out like he was very intense. Like I found the year very, very difficult. My next ones were like, oh, this is so easy by comparison. And they taught me things like ethics, which the first one, like, I was like, are you sure this is okay? He's like, yeah. They're like, no, that was not okay. Wow. So there were many things that I learned what not to do from the first mentor. And so the next 2 mentors, one of them passed away earlier this year, which is really sad. But the other one, he's still I've informed him he's never allowed dying. And he's still actively in my life. And since then I've had because I started a startup. So I was a startup mentor. And then I'm actually learning, I want to eventually become a field CISO, which is the next level of developer relations, if that makes sense, for security folks. Because after you have a certain level of seniority, it makes sense that you speak to the executives rather than the boots on the ground, if that makes sense, because I was an executive, et cetera. So I'm like slowly moving towards that career goal. And so the head of sales from Semgrep offered to mentor me, teach me all the...
Very cool.
And he's so busy. And I was like, so I was wondering, he's like, yeah, of course. What day do you want to meet?
Amazing.
He's like, let's set up reoccurring things. Here's a book. Here's this. Here. I'm like, oh, thank you.
That's awesome.
So like me having these mentors, making the introduction, helping me make like a really hard decision, right? Mm-hmm. Like, should I take this job or that job? Should I take this course or that course? Like, because you have all sorts of weird things happen in your career. It's like, should I complain or should I just do the thing? And having someone where they are always on your side. And so after basically when I started doing a lot of public speaking, people started writing me and saying, would you be my mentor? And so I started my first mentoring program for my little OWASP chapter, and I got 4. So there were 10 people that asked me to be their mentor. I'm like, me? I don't know anything. And they're like, yes, you do. Right. So I took on 4, all of whom are so successful now. Yeah, one of them has like 5 times as many YouTube followers that I do now. Like, she's like just like a rock star.
Amazing.
And awesome. So I learned from them and they learned from me. And so over the years, I keep mentoring new people. And I usually choose women because women find it harder to find mentors, especially. And there's also just things that affect women that a man might not be able to advise upon, which is a thing I fell short with a lot of my mentors, where they can't always advise on the thing. And so I try hard to prioritize like women mentees. And so that went really well, but it was small. And then all the mentors were full. And then we still have more people that wanted mentors. And so I started this thing in 2018 called Cyber Mentoring Monday. And so I also discovered that I'm a bad matchmaker. So I used to try to make matches, and I'm like, every one of them was bad. Every one of them, I was wrong. I was like, you guys both seem great. You'll clearly think each other are great. Oh, you hate each other. Oh, crap.
Oh, no.
So Cyber Mentoring Monday, people match themselves. So every Monday on Twitter and on Mastodon now, for many years, I just tweet, hey, it's Cyber Mentoring Monday. Are you looking to give back to our community and industry and take someone under your wing? Or are you looking to be mentored? Do you want to take your career to the next level? Post here. And so people will post, hey, like I'm an incident responder and I'm willing to mentor someone. Or, you know, I just graduated computer science and I want to work in this. And then they answer each other.
Oh, that's great.
And yeah. And
let them do it. Let them sort it out.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. It's resulted in people starting businesses. It's resulted in people finding jobs. It's resulted, some of them started a nonprofit together. And I remember I went to this conference and this guy's like, I want to buy you a beer. And I was like, I don't really drink beer. And also the beer is free. And he's like, I want to do you a favor. And he told me how he answered the thing. And he's like, and I met this young lady and for 6 months I was mentoring her and she just learned so fast and she was so amazing. And I kept telling my boss how I was so impressed. And one day my boss came up to me and said, hey, I just made a spot for a junior AppSec person on your team. And he's like, oh, so we'll start recruiting. He's like, you already know who that job's for. Just go get her. And he's like, she's the best person we could ever have, and I need to thank you because like this we would never have met. And so that's really good. And then I actually I just started a new one with OWASP. So I love OWASP, we know this. And so they have these conferences that move all around the world. And basically they're like, we want to start a mentoring program, but we don't know how to find all the mentors. So I helped them find a lot of mentors. And then I convinced Semgrep to sponsor and pay for everything, which was really nice of them. Nice. And, so from now on at the OWASP conferences, there'll be a mentoring speed date event where you meet all these different mentors and figure out which one's right for you. And then ideally you form a long-term relationship with the right one.
That's awesome. Oh, it's great. It's so much fun. Yeah. Well, we're going to take a quick break now, but when we return, we're going to do our lifestyle polygraph. Stay with us.
You're listening to the No Password Required podcast. We cover cybersecurity and a lot of other stuff.
As many of you know, the lifestyle polygraph is a test used by the federal government to determine if a person is worthy of learning some of our nation's most important secrets. Here, though, we use this technique for only slightly lower stakes to determine whether our guest can join our fantasy cybersecurity squad. Tanya, are you ready for your lifestyle polygraph?
I am so ready.
Perfect. All right. Number 1, if you could hire a science fiction character to be a cybersecurity consultant, who would you hire and why?
Oh, I think so. Right now I'm reading Red Rising, and I think I would hire Darrow, the main character, because he would scare everyone into doing whatever we needed.
Amazing.
He's like 7 feet tall.
Do you need you probably need a heavy on a good cybersecurity team, right, Tanya, so that they could be the bad guy and you could just point to them.
Yeah. My spaghetti arms are not intimidating.
Perfect. All right. Question 2. If you could hack into the Matrix, what's the first thing you would change?
I would make it so that everyone had all the things that they needed in their lives.
I love that answer.
And it's different for everyone, I know.
Sometimes we talk about the Star Trek versus Star Wars difference. And the thing that is always cool about Star Trek, Tanya, is that it's post-scarcity, where the idea is that there's enough food for everyone and everyone has access to education. And that is one of the nice things about, as fun as the Star Wars shows and movies are, the Star Trek, that aspect of Star Trek has always been exciting to me, at least.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Number 3. As a show, we're fans of the classic Canadian treat, Nanaimo bars. Can you name a different treat that could challenge for Canadian dessert supremacy?
Yes, the butter tart. Come on. Okay, so the butter tart is like a tart with this like brown, sugary, sweet, gooey center, and then you put pecans in it if you are civilized, and you put raisins in it if you are a savage. I don't like raisins.
Raisins are a breakfast dried fruit. They're not a dessert dried fruit.
No.
If they belong anywhere.
If
they belong anywhere. Exactly. If they belong anywhere.
They're really, really, really good.
Are they, Tanya, are they typically homemade, or are they something that you would get like in a bakery?
You can get them in bakeries everywhere. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And there's a place in Ontario called Grandma's Bake Shop, and they make the best ones, and they ship them around Canada. So they're like an inch deep of yummy sweet goo.
I mean, I'm already in from the name of the bakery alone. That's such a good name for a bakery. All right, number 4. Can you give us a breakdown of your passion for writing and performing parody songs?
Because I used to be a professional musician, and I also used to do comedy for a while. Joining the two just seemed really automatic. I used to have a band where we did funny songs. Like we had a song called Kirk versus Picard about who was hotter, which was obviously very important. Obviously,
awesome.
Is Picard. I mean, really.
Picard. That's...
Obviously.
That's awesome.
With his shiny, sexy, bald head.
I know. Ugh.
I'm going to call my haircut the Picard from now on.
Do it.
Should.
Give me like a regular Picard.
Yeah, I would do the same thing if I didn't have...
I like it.
Like, oh, you mean my Picard? Yeah, that's right.
But yeah, so then I started just joking around. Like I would sing to my partner and I would sing different words. And the feedback was, you should record that. I think people would think it was funny. So I did a couple where I just sang karaoke and just recorded it on Zoom, and people liked it. And my partner used to make music videos professionally.
Oh, cool. Okay.
So one day, we had Family Day in British Columbia. And so we talked about it, and it's like, well, what if we spend Family Day just being ridiculous and like make a music video? So we made a parody to Closer by 9 Inch Nails. So it's Closer to Prod. And we already have the next one planned.
Oh my God.
I see where that's going.
Closer to Prod.
Pretty good.
I love it.
But the next one's going to be about, it's going to be Amy Winehouse Rehab. It's like, they said, I gotta get a pen test. I said, no.
Oh my God.
That's
amazing.
Awesome. That's awesome.
And it's going to be like from the developer point of view of like, no, my app is bad, but I have a WAF.
Oh my God.
This is spectacular.
Yeah, there are some. I can't wait to share all of the things. And my voice is super made to sing Amy Winehouse. Okay. So it'll be a lot better. I'm not made to sing 9 Inch Nails. Yeah.
Tanya, are these available on YouTube, or are these more for select audiences? Okay. We can find these. That sounds amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So if you go to my YouTube channel, there's a playlist called Skits and Parodies. And so I have... You Know I'm No Good by Amy Winehouse, except for it's like open source, You Know I'm No Good. And it's about Log4j. Yeah.
That's awesome.
I know what I'm doing after this.
It's a good way to kind of like get the message across. But my partner, I'm like, can I go full silly in this video? So I have like a pretend guitar solo, but where I'm just playing the guitar solo on my computer and I'm spinning in a wheelie chair at the same time.
Oh my God.
I'm looking forward to this.
This is incredible.
Yeah, and I'm, in case you can't tell with the wigs, I'm the one playing the drums and the guitar, like all the instruments. Because my kids were like, oh, Tanya and her friends. I'm like, no, that's me. And they're like, oh my gosh, that's you, Mama.
That's awesome.
Amazing. All right.
So now I can business expense wigs. That's the key takeaway. I want a mullet.
See, yeah, I mean, I have my hair cut in a soft mullet right now, and I have to say, I'm a mullet fan.
Yeah, I need a mullet wig, and it's a legit business expense. That's
I
right,
agree
CRA.
with that. I agree with that. All right, so I'm pretty sure you've already made it, but last question. Which of these scenarios would your teenage self have been able to predict? You as a farmer, you as a global cybersecurity education leader, or you as a parody song enthusiast?
Definitely the parody song enthusiast. My whole passion for gardening and farming came on in my mid-30s. I had a black thumb and like never had houseplants and grew up like in downtown and like I never thought I would like any of that, and I never saw that coming. I actually I had burnout. And then I looked up how to get better as fast as possible because I'm type A. And they're like, you need to get sun, you need to do grounding, you need exercise. I'm like, how can I accomplish those all at the same time? I have work to do. And so I just was like, oh, I'll plant a garden. I'll check all those boxes really fast. And then I loved it. It's like instant stress relief. I just go like garden my little plants. I have hundreds of flowers coming up right now. And I'm like really excited.
I think like the ability to work on a project that by definition does not have immediate results and force yourself to that box is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? Yeah, you can't get immediate results. You have to. It's only long term, Tanya. It's only long term. Well, Tanya,
and it's a thing you made. And in software development, you can't like touch the things you make, and this is a thing that you can touch and feel and smell.
Yeah.
Tanya, I want to thank you for joining us here in the podcast. If our listeners want to connect with you or learn more about projects you're working on, what can they do to do that?
If you go to SheHacksPurple.ca, that's me. And I have a newsletter, and there's links to all my social media. If you look up SheHacksPurple, that's me pretty much everywhere, except for I have an imposter or an impersonator who has made a website who's trying to sell VPN and gambling. That's not me.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So if it doesn't say my name anywhere, that's not me. They're trying to sell a bunch of gimmicky things on that site. But basically, if you look up SheHacksPurple, the first many pages of results are me.
Thank you.
And so, and come, check out my YouTube channel or my books or whatever is of interest. I have a lot of free stuff. And also go to academy.semgrep.dev and then just take all my courses for free. It's so exciting to not have to charge. I want the whole world to know all the things I know, so then I do not have to do this job anymore because all the apps are secure. Now I'll just go back to being a dev.
Well, thank you so much, Tanya. And we'll have the links for this for the listeners in the show description.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Tanya. Us to the end of our show. But first, Kaylee, what did you learn today?
So I've learned that No Password Required needs to have a variety show. But more seriously, I loved that she didn't let her lack of funds be a gatekeeper for the career that she wanted, the passion that she saw. That's really inspiring to know that not only did she take advantage of free resources when they weren't widely available, she came up with very clever ways of accessing those learnings as well.
Yeah, and I learned I've learned a lot about election security over the course of our podcast because we've talked to a number of critical infrastructure players who've worked on U.S. election security. But it was fascinating to hear from her about Canadian election security and how it's done differently there. They've got centralization. Yeah. But the part to me that resonated most was that the Canadian government is sharing it essentially with any other country that wants to access it, and they're collaborating and they're learning from each other. That was a really kind of neat thing because, the easiest way to spread those sorts of values and democratic values is to do it democratically.
Exactly.
And it looks like Canada's pulling it off. So that's a cool thing. And kudos to her and to her colleagues in the government for their work.
Agreed.
So for the entire No Password Required team, I'm Jack Clabby. Thank you for listening, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you for listening to the No Password Required podcast. You can find us on social media at No Password Pod. Please remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the No Password Required podcast. And if you know someone who might like it, please share it with them. The show is produced by Cyber Florida. And a special thank you goes out to our friends at Carlton Fields. If you'd like to learn more, visit our website, cyberflorida.org/pod. All opinions expressed by the No Password Required podcast participants are their own and do not exclusively represent the views and opinions of Cyber Florida.